Buenos días. Pues vamos a empezar.
Good morning. We're going to begin this presentation on data protection. I hope you find this of interest. And before I begin, I'd like to explain what data protection is about, some background information. I also talk about legislation in force. Julian will talk about computers, and I'll talk to you about data protection in general. Data protection is a right that we all have as individuals to decide on our own personal data. I'm not only referring to the data that directly identify me, like my name, picture, surname, ID number. I'm referring to all personal info, everything that can identify me as an individual. And this is a fundamental right that is linked to the right to self-determination. 50 years ago, it was easy to decide on personal data because it was written on a paper and it was you to decide. But now it's difficult because we all leave traces, digital traces on the internet. We all have credit cards, we all have mobile phones, and we all have a clinical record in the hospitals where they provide us with treatment. So it's impossible not to leave a digital footprint of our information. Have you ever stopped to think why some apps installed in your mobile recommend you or ask you for authorization to be able to access your battery profile or manage your use of the battery? Have you ever thought about that small detail? That's a way of identifying someone. If you, in the OS of a mobile, let it access your battery, you're allowing it to know what apps you've got installed in the mobile and which are the ones that consume most batteries, and therefore which are the ones to use most. And as a result, it will be able to do advertising or offer that info to a third party on the apps you have installed. If, for example, you have a sports app and you practice a specific sport, when you enter the social media, you will receive advertising because that app that you have in the mobile has sold your data to a third party, and that third party is showing you ads. And that third party is making money, and as you access those websites, you are generating money. And here is when the Data Protection Act comes into place, where we need an act, a regulation that sets limits in order to ensure that people can exercise fully their rights and freedoms. We currently have a directive and an organic act for data protection. Next year, we will have a European data protection regulation. The regulation basically will come into force on May 25th, 2018. We can have additional regulation as member states of the EU. According to the regulation, we can have a national regulation in order to adapt the community regulation to our Spanish legal framework. For example, the Spanish legal framework needs to adapt the community legislation because, for example, here in Spain we have the autonomous regions and we have some specificities. And this is a fundamental right that needs to be enshrined in our legislation as well. We need to regulate this ourselves, not only in EU regulation. Scope, well, it applies to all goods and services and anything that entails the control or the analysis of people, resident people. I'm not referring to people that are citizens or officially. I'm referring to anyone on community grounds. The principles of the previous directive are implicit in this new regulation. There are almost no changes. The only change at a national level is that in terms of principles, we used to have what we call tacit or implicit consent, and this is going to disappear. We're going to move towards a scheme or system of explicit consent. What's the main novelty? What's new with this regulation? It's not just a matter of principles, it's a matter of compliance. What's new has to do with compliance. The active responsibility or accountability. The principle of accountability is the news regarding this regulation. In the past, you had to comply, but now you need to prove that you're complying with this regulation. So there is an accountability side to it. That's new with this new regulation, and you need to demonstrate that you're doing this proactively, that you're reviewing the measures you've put into place. What kind of measures? Well, for example, first thing you need to do before the 25th of May is to have a register. If you're designing apps or info or systems or digital systems, you need to consider that there are data protective principles that you need to apply from the design stage. What does this mean? Well, that before you design your system, you need to think about how you're going to process information. If you haven't considered that, that will translate into cost in the future. So more than an expense, you should view this as an investment. We at the Spanish agency have been contacted with queries. And for example, companies that send data abroad, and we ask them, have you thought about where you're sending that info? Have you considered the fact that you're internationally transferring data? And they say, no, we hadn't thought about that. But now they do with this new regulation. You need to be able to secure that transfer. And data protection by default is very much related to the concept of opt-in or opt-out. It is the user who has to decide whether he or she wants to be part of a list that receives data. It is the user that also has the right to decide whether he wants to opt out. And there's another novelty, something else that's new, which has to do with impact assessments. So you're going to treat and process data. You're going to process personal data, and perhaps we're talking about high or low risk data. We're unaware of that. If they entail high risk, you will have to conduct necessarily an impact assessment, i.e., an analysis before processing. This involves planning. All these aspects are very much related to what we call the risk approach of the new community data protection regulation. If you have done an impact assessment and you're still doubting on whether you can or cannot process data, you will have to contact a data protection authority, and that authority will tell you if you can do so or not, and will specify the measures you need to implement in order to process data. New active responsibility or accountability. Up until now in Spain, security breaches had to be notified by the telecom providers according to the National Telecom Provider Act. But now everybody has their responsibility of reporting security breaches to the Spanish Data Protection Agency. How can we prove this active responsibility or accountability? Well, there are several mechanisms: the code of conduct, the certification schemes. These are also mechanisms that help us certify this. If I subscribe for certification with ISO 17001, basically I'm saying that I'm ensuring security and that I'm being proactive in terms of data protection. What do you have to do in terms of security measures? Well, what was said previously by Article 9 of the LOPD, you need to implement technical and organizational measures as appropriate based on the state of art. And this of course is a risk approach, and when the regulation talks about risk approach, it does so from 2 points of view. On the one hand, we have the security measures, and secondly, you have a risk in terms of the rights and duties of individuals. How should we interpret this risk vis-a-vis the rights and duties of individuals, or rights and obligation? Let me give you an example. Imagine that I haven't analyzed my risk appropriately. I manage a health center that processes citizens' data, and I have breached security, and I as a result, all the data from my patients are accessible. This would be an important security breach because this would affect these people not only directly, but also indirectly, as it would also affect their health. Probably these people would have greater difficulties when hiring or health insurance policy because the insurance companies won't view them as profitable and will probably not want to engage in a relationship with them. What could be the impact on these people's lives? Would it be the same for everybody? Well, probably not. Let's imagine that if someone has AIDS, for example, and is a 90-year-old, that person probably doesn't mind about having that info disseminated because he is no longer working. And but what happens if we're talking about a child? If that info is disclosed, perhaps he's discriminated at school, at university, it could also have a negative impact in terms of his employability. Maybe he's unseen as a profitable employee because he requires a medical assistant. And this is what the regulation is talking about when it talks about the risks regarding the rights and duties of individuals. As for the security measures and the activity register, well, first a description whenever it's possible, where possible, but it's almost always possible. How am I complying with security measures? If I'm a public administration, I will have to comply with a national system. If I'm a private company, maybe I have a company that I've hired that is managing this according to ISO 17000 or maybe an implementing X standard. That's everything you need to say. But then you can break down all the documents. Up until now, we had the security document. Are you all aware of the security document and how it works? It was an internal document, an organization in-house document that described the rights and duties of employees, profiles, also a list of profiles that had to be very much detailed, and you can have a link where all this information is. You don't have to explicit all the info. You don't need to make it public, but you can have a link and that grants you access to this info. And then adherence to a code of conduct or a certification mechanism. This can be part of your security measures. And you can adhere to a sectoral code of conduct. And aside from demonstrating my proactivity in the way I process data, it's a way of basically demonstrating that I'm complying and that I have a set of security measures duly in place. Something that changes as well with this new regulation and that renders managers more responsible and actively responsible is the relationship between the users and the managers. And the due diligence element was implicit in the past. Now it's no longer the case. It's not a matter of hiring whoever. You need to regulate a series of things. As you can see on slide, on the one hand, we have the non-disclosure duty or confidentiality duty, and Article 12 LOPD is also enshrined here.
And now we have more powers given to the person responsible. For example, inspection. You can go and see what the person in charge is doing. As the person responsible, I can do it, and I can do it with a service contract. In relation to this, just to say that we have published a manual or a guide with recommendations to guide contractual clauses in this direction. What are the tasks for somebody that is responsible to the compliance? The regulation speaks about the model contracts. We don't have such a thing so far. We just have this manual or handbook, so we see the clauses we can add in this service provision contract about the international transfers. Here the regulation is more flexible than before. Here in international transfers there is more flexibility. There are more new mechanisms so that you can carry out an international transfer that can be carried out by both positions. BCRs, standard contractual clauses approved by the Commission, the contractual clauses approved by a national level but also by the Commission, and codes of conduct and certification schemes. There is also the possibility of legitimate interest. About rights, it pays a special importance to transparency, especially for underage. Any right, when it affects an underage, it has a greater impact in their life than to an adult. Regulation takes into account this situation and stresses the principle of transparency and the information that the minor should get in relation to handling his or her data. It includes the right to forgetfulness in a regulated manner. We know that this right is the same as we call in the past the right to opposition applied to browsers, and its regulation also relates to civil responsibility, the right to indemnity and responsibility when the handling of data has been misused. What does it mean for control authorities? This regulation, a new supervision model, is an added complexity. We should all agree now at a European level. How was the coordination before? In Brussels, we had the group work by Article 29, all data protection authority, national data protection entities work together, and now we will have the European Committee for Data Protection. We had the European Supervisory of Data Protection, that will be the European one now. A claim can be presented through a single shop in any of the countries to any other control authority, and then we should see who is entitled to carry out this research. There will be a complex system to regulate sanctions. We should see what are the sanctioning criteria. About sanctions, we keep the same principles. They should be effective, proportionated, and deterrent. And as I said, they should give the possibility for penal sanctions or criminal sanctions. In Europe, we have the concept of administrative sanction, which is not the case in some countries in Europe. There aren't both pathways. When we refer to the possibility of criminal sanctions, this is our way. If you are obtaining some profits thanks to a sanction, they can ask you to pay them back. Let us see how this will finally be realized. The fines are very high. I was criticized because we had 600,000 euros fines, but now they are quite high. We speak about 4% of a company. What do we want by this? Those are not the fines to somebody that has a coffee shop. We're not going to sanction them as much because it will be the closing of companies. We will be against the objectives of the regulation itself. Here we're speaking about large companies. The idea is to avoid the profitability of the infraction. There are companies that in the profit and loss account, it was more profitable to pay the fine to the data protection agency than to comply with the treating or handling of information. Here we see large companies, large internet companies. Where do we have all information? from our new regulation. We have a specific site for this. All information published is in our website. Here to the left, there's a small section. And in May next year, this small section will be our website, and we will speak about the new regulation. And that's all I wanted to say. I'm now going to give the floor to Julián.
¿Cuál es la tuya? ¿Dónde la tienes?
A ver, si entramos
¿El micro?
¿Se puede hablar aquí? Ahí está. ¿Puedo hablar?
Te lo voy a ver. Yo estoy aquí, si quieres. Pues lanzamos, te sales, escapes, cierras y aquí tienes.
Y ya la tengo, pues, vale.
Yo te lo dejo ya preparar los vídeos, ¿vale?
Escape, cierro.
Esta es la tuya, ¿no?
Sí, déjame. Espera, si no lo pongo en esto de aquí. Hola.
Hello. Following with Andres' presentation about the regulatory framework, I would like to focus
La agencia
on what the agency do to raise the awareness of underage when handling their personal information, especially in internet. I will only speak about the digital world. Those are the principles that we all know, the possibilities and the risks for our private life, and something that if you're a youngster, you overcome time and space limitations, and information you upload will be there forever. And we want to raise the awareness about this fact. In all information we give in internet, personal data, as Andres said, everything that can identify you is used by many because we have personal information to give. Of course, we have the regulation why we should protect the children. We all know the principle of the highest interest to the minors, but the last reform about the legislation stresses that the highest interest is going to be taken into account for minors, and it has a prevalence against the rest of the interest of those that surround them, and training, they are considered as a vulnerable collectivity, and the exposure of the information that we give about them, but that they give. And sometimes we say they are more capable, but those skills are mechanical. The fact of being reasonable, to think in a logical manner, they have to acquire them as in any training process. The famous concept of digital natives is going to be considered, quote unquote. What we can do is, if we adults, we don't train them, we don't accompany them, they could end up being digital orphans instead of digital natives. This is a chart of the National Employment Institute about the use of internet. This includes the whole spectrum, not only minors. And if you see global internet use between 10 and 15 years, they use 95%. Those figures are repeated. If you get data from 2016, it's slightly below, but it's almost universal. The use of internet technology is universal in minors, and this is something that is important. The Sociological Research Center, in one of their surveys, asked about minors and internet access and how it should be done, and you see the results. 85% should have a limited internet access. They are those that think that they should have some limitations, those that should be totally limited, just a little limited. But if you see in 85%, the idea is to limit it or to raise the awareness, or maybe this is impossible. What are we doing in our agency? We have a strategic plan for 4 years, paying a special emphasis in prevention to all. And here we have an action plan where minors and education are considered a priority. The strategic plan, of course, is uploaded in our website. So the idea is to give or to meet those objectives, to promote knowledge, to the right to data protection and the value of privacy, to educate in a responsible use of information, not only personal information, but also information from third parties. We very happily provide our own information, but sometimes we give third parties information, whether in pictures or in some other format, without asking for consent. Certain behaviors, and we will see it, are an offense, are criminal. Below 14s, minors cannot be subject to a court case, but the responsibility go for their parents. And between 14 and 18, they've got the minor criminal law that has some measures for those actions that are crime, as harassment or grooming are crimes, and they can give rise to some criminal or civil responsibilities. At the end of the day, we try to decrease as much as possible, and from the viewpoint of personal information, but this is something that permeates in the rest of the areas. We try to reduce risk situations so that they have a secure use of internet, enjoying its advantages. In this strategic plan, we have all those actions and some more. And I'm going to stop mainly, or in the last two. Of the rest, in our agency to education authorities, we have proposed a contents planning to develop in the curriculum. All regional governments have a curriculum where information and ICTs are included. In Madrid, they have a subject that is robotics, but they are not developed in all regional governments. This should be part of a module that in this subject might help to get to know about the regulation and the awareness about this subject. And the agency has proposed this. So the idea is that they should work in this direction. And now let us see the new teaching materials. The action of the agency, in addition to collaboration with other administrations in creating teaching materials or materials to raise the awareness. The title is udecide.es. We have redesigned a new website, and I invite you to visit it, those that are here, so that you disseminate information about it, where we keep everything for underage, for parents, for teachers. There are awards and there are screens, help screens when people are at risk. And teaching materials, guides, where we teach about the good use of internet. We have a version for children and other for parents and educators. In this teach how to read in internet, we speak about what behaviors can be harassment or crime, what are the consequences. And the guide that will teach them how to be legal in internet, we teach parents and educators what the regulations say and what is the consequence from a more serious viewpoint. All of those are found in PDF files, so the idea is that they are known and useful to all. This is a publication, a quite recent publication. It was published on the 13th of September, devoted to school centers more than children. School centers ask us many questions about how to treat personal data, or situation by parents as presented by Parents Association. We have cases where in some occasions Christmas party was over because father said that they wanted to record the party and somebody else said this was not possible, but this is not the case. But in some school centers they ended up suspending Christmas party for problems related to the recording, and we give solutions to those problems. All this material is available in internet. Here we have some copies that are available to all of you. Those are some security and privacy forums in collaboration with the INCIBE. Their objectives and their target is generic, but for underage is very useful. You also have all this material in our website. It will teach you to protect portable devices, to manage information in the cloud, and it has 6 tutorial videos to set your privacy settings in the most common social media. There are different videos that are tutorials, and they are available in the website. We collaborated with the Spanish public television, and there were some small videos made by professionals. It's a television series with from Clan channel, the children's channel of Spanish national television, that tries to send brief messages about the use of information that they are at the website, but also in the Clan channel. They are available. They are very short and brief videos, very effective, and they were recorded by or shot by professionals. Those, and I will give you an example. We have presented those videos on the past 13th of September. This is a series of 4 videos. They last 4 or 5 minutes, and I will show you one, and they use fullness for families and school centers, and also in video and in documents. Last year, the agency organized a workshop with families given by Angel Pablo, that he has attended this CyberCamp as a cyber expert. This workshop, or the result of the workshop, is 9 videos divided by topics. They are heavier than the ones entitled "You Controlling Internet." The target audience is the families in this case, but they are also available. And we also have some awards that we call every year Data Protection Awards, and there is also an award for good education practices for secure surfing the net, that is for all school centers and for those institutions that have disseminated information among minors about good internet practice. In January, we will communicate the winners, and in 2016 we had 17 education centers that presented projects. The winner was a school from Salamanca, and we had some candidates to the individual that helped the promotion and dissemination of good practices. Because I don't have much time, I wanted to go back and speak about something that is interesting. The agency started in September 2015 a communication channel that is open for the handling of data by minors or for minors, because we're not the police, we're not well known, especially among the minors, but parents and school centers and healthcare centers and city councils and social services, they ask questions about the good or bad handling of data. For example, at school, I have to request consent by all students, but it's just for an internet. But if I say no, they say that I cannot take pictures. So what do we do in those situations? Those are the type of queries or questions we get. And since its implementation, we've had around 13,000 queries, and those are our channels to respond. The email address is the more advisable, but you also have a telephone line or WhatsApp. And before showing you the videos, to say something or just to comment about the legislative framework for minors data handling. For everyone, we implement all the regulation, but it has some specificities. For example, that to give consent, you should be above 14. Below, it has to be the parents or tutors in any application, any information society service devoted to minors. Below 14, parents should give consent, and those that ask for consent, they should correspond the burden of the proof of that age. And I know you're going to say that is complex and difficult. Social media, you just have counters. You introduce your age, and if you are above 14, they just open it up. But there is a due diligence duty in establishing mechanism to check the age. You should take into account that minors, we cannot get information from minors' families, context, economic situation or job of the parents. You can ask data about your parents so that the company might address the parents, because I can ask permission to treat this information because I am a toys producer or I offer services devoted to minors. Information, when it's addressed to minors, the information about the handling of information should be in an accessible language appropriate to the age range, which is not always the case. It corresponds to the leaders to certify those procedures that verify the age or the parents' consent and not the minor pretending is one of his or her parents. And in relation to the European Parliament, consent should be given from 16 onwards, but it also sets space so that member states can lower the range from 13 to 16, because this is an open process and there is a draft bill for data protection. This new bill is still in progress, but it has said that consent age for minors is 13, and this is equal to the European scene and also US. The large social media as Facebook, the age range in United States is 13. When they arrived to Spain, they had to adapt their counters to move it up to 14. So now we are equal to Europe and to US social media. And here I just wanted to show you
¿Dónde lo tengo? Al final lo tengo que tener aquí. Sí, a ver, aquí vamos a minimizar. Aquí. Esto es un ejemplo de los 4 vídeos.
this is one of the 4 videos. It lasts not even 5 minutes, and I hope that you enjoy it. What you see here is not a bicycle. It's a Fit Duran 3, one of the best BMX bicycles in the market. This is Rai, his owner. He's 14 years old, and he's a BMX crack. Rai goes riding everywhere in the morning to go to secondary school. After school, goes to practice different jumps. Every weekend he rides to record videos for his YouTube channel explaining his tricks. He rather goes on a bike than doing anything else. Very often he just interrupts any conversation to go riding at night. He always takes his bike with him home. He's always with his bike. For long he hasn't been sitting in his chair, but to do his homework, to have dinner, he's always on his bike. When he showers, he also washes his bicycle, and of course when he goes to bed at night, the bicycle goes to bed with him. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Maybe Rai is exaggerating. You might enjoy your bicycle, but something quite different is not to be able to separate from it. Let us make an experiment. What if we change Ray's bicycle by internet? Do you think it's an exaggeration? Have you ever taken your smartphone to bed? Haven't you ever watched your tablet while you were doing your homework or having dinner? You've never interrupted a conversation or any other thing because you've got a WhatsApp message. How long can you be doing an activity without interrupting it for a WhatsApp message or any other thing? Internet is not bad. It's got many good things. It's good to communicate with friends, family, to find new games, watch films, read books, find sites and information, and to sort out all sorts of problems, to buy, to sell, to teach and to learn. To have internet is really grand, as having a Dug X3 bike. But if you spend your life in internet, you will be missing many other things, as if you were always on your bike. There's something else. The internet is similar to a bike. If you misuse it, you can have disastrous consequences. No matter how good you are riding, if you are on the opposite lane without brakes, you might end up crashing to a car. Okay, there are not cars in internet, but have you ever thought about your digital footprint? Whenever you publish something in your media, you are leaving a footprint, whether a tweet, Facebook post, or picture in Instagram. This digital footprint is the memory of what your activity in internet, and it will go along all your life, for good and for bad. Imagine that tomorrow you want to work in a company. The first thing they will do to decide whether they will hire you or not is to look for your name in internet. They will Google you. They will look at your blog, your Facebook comments, your profiles, everything you previously published, and they will have a better or worse view depending on your digital footprint. Social media are not dangerous, as bicycles are not dangerous if you drive carefully. That's why before sharing something in the media, it's good to think about the impact it will have in the digital footprint. First league match dismissed the player because they found out that he had insulted the team in Twitter. He just tweeted it many years before, but they left a trace. So remember, what you publish in internet stays, and your digital footprint will be with you for long, and it might have good or bad consequences. That depends on you. Keep a reflexive attitude when you publish in the media, in the social media. Internet and social media are great, but there are more other great things in life, and you can enjoy them when you're not connected.
Bueno, este
This is one of the examples of the 4 videos that are in the agency's website. The objective is to disseminate them and use them as much as possible as the rest of the teaching materials. Let us see if I can come back to my PowerPoint. This is yours, Andres.
lo cierro. Otras. Estas. Este es el tuyo, ¿no? El mismo, el anterior. Sí. Está hecho, perdón. Ese es. Ya está. Ya está, me he hecho los dos. Todos estos, los materiales.
All those materials are available in our website. The teaching guide that you have in hard copy, the you control in internet videos, and some tutorials, and the workshop for families from the agency. Whenever we make an investment, or our objective is prevention, support, and the minor's best interest in our area, what we would like is to be used and disseminated at home, at school centers, and for families. And we have a queries spot where you can communicate with us for questions about data handling for and by minors, whether the parents or the school centers. There are things that we might not be able to respond, but in this channel we have further information when we speak about situations where it goes beyond the handling of personal information and our actions that can be an offense. We have channels that directly take you to police agencies when people are at risk. We have Foundation ANAR for cases of harassment or losses that require something that we don't have, whether support or psychological help. All this information is in our communication channel. Please visit it and disseminate it. And is 105, and that's all I wanted to tell you. Thank you.
¿Sí? Sí.
We have a question. Hi, thank you for the information. I work at a public administration, and I should admit that I didn't know much about this. At work as a public servant, I found out a few days ago that there isn't any sanction against me for misuse of personal data. I've been working as if it was the case, just due to my ethics. But does the new regulation include sanctions that is not just an evaluation that states you're a bad employee? If you work in the public administration, you have the same problem. The agency can sanction you as a civil servant by an infringement. It's not always economical, but is an infringement whether to you or to the entity you work for, but you can be fined either economically or disciplinary, or you can have a criminal sanction. Sorry, we didn't get the comment. She's not using the microphone, so we cannot translate these lady's comments.
Lo que no hay sanción económica para la.
There's no economic fine for public administrations, but I saw it as an admonishment. Well, it goes beyond that. It can be an admonishment, or they can open up, let's say, a complaint against you. Well, this bill is still a bill, but when the breach is perpetrated by a public administration, there's a possibility of initiating disciplinary proceedings against that person. This is something new, and the new bill is still being discussed. So if approved, it's not only making that, let's say, punishment public, but not only that, there's also the possibility of having the administration start disciplinary proceedings against the perpetrator. But this is part of a bill. I just found out 3 days ago that there was no economic fine. I can, of course, adhere to professional secrecy, but I was working with the idea that the data with which I handle, and I work with women that are victims of domestic abuse. And I always insisted, don't leave any documents on the table. You do very well. You do very well, because one of the sanctions or punishments that we had to issue against the civil servant was precisely because this lack of professional secrecy. So we issued a penalty to the administration and to the worker. Disciplinary proceedings were started against the employee. I have a couple of questions. The implementation of the general European regulation, will it replace the Spanish law, the LOPD, or will both coexist? Well, it will depend. Now we're at a bill stage. On the 25th of May, we will be talking about an act. And there will be perhaps a full or partial derogation. So on the 25th of May, our current LOPD will disappear. But the regulation, the community regulation, has already been approved. Why are we losing time and doing a new LOPD if it's going to extinguish or terminate on May the 25th? Well, the current framework is applicable, and basically what happens now is that our LOPD cannot have any terms or articles that contravene the community regulation. European regulations can be directly implemented. They don't need to be incorporated in the internal framework. But this one is a bit special because it lets some leeway to states. For example, the ages of minors between 13 and 16 years of age. So you can decide the age group. And with the new act, what we want to do is complete or cover those aspects that are not governed by the regulation, because the act can never regulate or against the European regulation. I don't know if you've checked the text or the bill. For the first time, we're talking about the possibility of accessing to data of people that have passed away. And normally the LOPD didn't apply to the deceased. But inheritors can now access to the suppression of data regarding deceased people. This is something new. For example, the new LOPD covers video surveillance. This isn't covered by the European regulation. Also, representatives of companies. But what the new act does is to cover those aspects that are not covered by the community regulation. And as I was saying, you do have some leeway, as happens with directives. And there's the typical example of minors. The bill has talked about 13-year-olds, but states will have the final say.